This is the very first video of the fall gauntlet that is coming your way when it comes to product launches. I am of course talking about AMD's 7000 series Zen 4 architecture CPUs. Can't you tell? Just launch, look at your inbox, look at your sub feed. It's gonna probably be Zen 4 craziness everywhere. But why not start here?
Bring your setup to the next level with CableMod's all-new custom coiled keyboard cables. Available in a variety of colors and connector types utilizing best-in-class connectors, the keyboard cables give your setup a look and feel it deserves. To see the complete lineup of custom keyboard cables available from CableMod, click the link in the description below.
All right, so today we are taking a look at the 7950X, AMD's new Zen 4 flagship CPU on mainstream. They're still waiting on any of the fun Threadripper stuff to make their way here, but mainstream, top of the line, top dog CPU. And we are comparing it to Intel's top dog currently at 12900K. And the reason why we're doing that is 13th gen isn't out yet. I can't compare it to something that's not out or rumors. So when 13th gen launches, we'll be comparing it obviously to these results. But there's a few things I wanna talk about. I wanna talk about the mounting mechanism, I wanna talk about coolers, I wanna talk about the RAM timings and training and all that, the motherboards, and then obviously the benchmarks and stuff. So we'll get started here by sort of just saying, this is obviously AMD's Zen 4 architecture, 7950X, top dog, 16 cores, 32 threads, full-size P-cores, no E-cores or anything like that. Just 16 cores that have simultaneous multi-threading that can go balls to the wall up to 5.7 gigahertz. And yes, we were indeed seeing 5.7 plus gigahertz. Just like anything else, there's an algorithm that basically says if temperature is X and power limit is not max, then push harder. And that's a neat thing to have because it's auto overclocking. You don't have to do it yourself. So yes, we were absolutely seeing 5.7 gigahertz on every single one of the cores. Not all core. It means every one of the cores was able to hit 5.7 when it comes to trading off that workload. Whereas Intel, on the other hand, just like the previous version of AMD, whereas only the two best identified cores per CCX would take that high workload of the max core clock, max turbo clock, Intel, during our tests, was only handing it off to two different cores, Core 6 and Core 7, which is exactly how the max turbo velocity boost is expected to work. It identifies the two best cores and that's it. Whereas every single core on this guy was able to hit, well, that guy is not in the box anymore, was able to hit 5.7 gigahertz, which was just nuts. I wanna talk about general use, what it felt like using the system. But first, we'll show you the benchmarks and then we'll get into the nitty gritty. But don't click off after the benchmarks. There's some stuff I wanna make you guys aware of on how Zen 4 kind of works, some of the nuances and things you need to know if you are considering jumping onto AMD's new platform. Here's the way a $700 AMD CPU compares to a $590 Intel CPU. I know I keep grabbing this box and calling it the 12900K. It's just because I guess this is almost like a size representation of the two CPUs in terms of power. Yeah, so, okay, you might have noticed a few things on those charts. And I don't have a 12900K CPU that's like in the box or anything, they're all being used. Okay, let's talk about a few things here. You might have noticed when it comes to the single core performance of Cinebench R23, they were exactly the same. Now, when I looked at that and I tested it multiple times and did some sanity checks, I was like, wait a minute. If AMD 79, and that was the first test I ran, by the way, so that kind of gave me, okay, here we go. What? Because I was confused. I went, wait, this is 5.7 gigahertz, and I verified by monitoring the cores and their utilization and their temperatures and all that stuff while the test was running, that they were indeed boosting to 5.7 like they're supposed to. But they both got the exact same score. So that tells me at 5.7, if this is scoring the same as the Intel at 5.1, and again, pretend this is Intel, that means this is slower per clock. That means instructions per clock, or IPC, is lower on this. So I had to do some digging on this. Here's what we found out about Cinebench R23. This time around, with the architecture of Zen 4, it does not run R23 in a traditional AVX or a 512 instruction. It actually runs a 256x2, or two simultaneous 256 threads, which I think is happening per CCX simultaneously. So the Intel actually was faster when we locked the clock speed at 5 gigahertz, because when you test IPC, you have to lock them at the same frequency. If one's allowed to boost higher, that it's instructions per clock, and that clocks have to be the same. So that's when I went, wait a minute, what happens if I lock it? So I locked it, and that was when it dropped all the way down to an 1806, putting it over 200 points less single core than the 12900K. But that's because of, again, the fact that it's running a 256 instruction times 2 versus a 512. So it's not as efficient at that particular task. And there's gotta be some sort of a design trade-off on how the CCX is working with this particular family. Does that mean it's indicative of a across-the-board slowdown IPC? No, it depends. Is it running a 512 instruction bit or instruction set? If it's not, then it's a completely different story. So if you look at Geekbench's single core IPC locked at 5 gigahertz, that tells a better story. 1951 versus AMD's 2026. So that made me feel better going, okay, sanity test, everything's kind of running the way it's supposed to. But again, you might not, if you didn't understand the way the instruction sets were running, then you'd think something's really weird with Cinebench. Because I got the exact same score, I initially thought there was some sort of a weird cap. Like, are these so fast Cinebench can't handle faster? But that's not how it works. So, but when it comes to multi-threading, I mean, it's a bloodbath. Over 38,000 on the AMD versus 27,000 and some change on the Intel. So I mean, we're talking 10,000, over 10,000 points difference. It's just nuts. I remember when the 12th gen launched, I was like, oh my God, a mainstream CPU getting you 27,000, that's nuts. And then we would test it on like the 5900X and we'd get like 20,000. And then we'd test it on like the 29 or the 5950X and we'd get like 22,000. I'm like, oh my goodness, that just shows how far the E cores and P cores and 12th gen really stepped it up. So that's when I started thinking to myself, like, what is AMD gonna pull out of their hat to try and catch up and make up for that difference? But not only did they do it, this is like a tortoise and a hare story. Only AMD's the tortoise and the hare, if that makes any sense. It doesn't, but I think you get the idea here. It's as if the tortoise was as fast as the hare all along and never took a nap, whatever, however the Aesop's fable goes. We'll move on because I'm just making myself look stupider than I already do every day. But I couldn't really like comprehend the advancement they had made with 7950X and Zen 4 until we compared it to Phil's Threadripper. Now Phil is running as his editing station a Threadripper 3970X. So that's a Zen 2 architecture. So we're 2 generations behind technically, but it's twice the cores, 32 cores and 64 threads in a highly multi-threaded app like Cinebench, which will utilize all of them. He scored a 43,029. And this scored, like I said, a 38,051. It is less than 5,000 points behind. To put this into perspective, this is twice the distance closer to Threadripper than the 12th gen is to this. So if this is 12th gen, this is Threadripper, it's here. It has twice the cores than this. Most of the reason for that is because, again, 2-generational architecture that maxes out at 4.0 gigahertz all-core. Because again, 32 cores, that's a lot, even though the chip's like that big. But moving on, what I thought was really interesting here is, I mean, no surprise, just across the board, just complete domination by this CPU because of the fact that it's 16 full-size cores, none of the E-core, P-core thing. And when it comes to the bottleneck test, that's where I took the 3090 Ti EVGA for the Win 3 card, because I went, how do I create a bottleneck test? And the way you have to do this is you have to have the GPU rendering so many frames that it's the CPU that's processing those frames, holding things up. Okay, so we took Forza Horizon 5, 1080p, very low settings. Everything was as low as it could go, which felt so backwards from my normal benchmark routines. But anyway, what I like about Horizon is it gives you a CPU simulation average FPS, a CPU render average FPS, and a GPU average FPS. So on Intel, 363 on the CPU sim, on AMD, 490. What this tells you is that if you're currently running a 3090 Ti right now, and you were, for whatever reason, running 1080p low settings. Actually, you don't have to be running low settings. I could do the same test at high settings and still see a performance difference because of the fact that the CPU is still holding it back. So you want a CPU that's not bottlenecking your GPU, because that leads to consistent frame times because the GPU is handling it. And the CPU is waiting on the GPU. That's the best case scenario. The GPU is rendering something and then the CPU takes time and then the GPU has to wait on the CPU. That's where stutters and weird things happen when it comes to bottlenecking. I was not expecting that much of an uplift of over 70 FPS. So that was mind blowing. Let's talk about wattages. The Intel under full load was full all-core load was using 220 watts package temperature, or package wattage. AMD was pulling 231. Now that's exactly where we expected it to be actually, because that is the package limitation on that. And one of the reasons why AM5 is LGA and not PGA is because of the fact that, and that's not Professional Golf Association, by the way, if you're wondering. Anyway, the reason why it's a LAN grid array and not a pin grid array is because of the fact that the package wattage limitations on AM4 were so much lower than that. What AMD essentially did was beef up the architecture and then lift the headroom, the max of how far temperatures were allowed to go and package wattage was allowed to draw. When it comes to CPU mounting, by the way, and to keep that wattage cool, you can see here, I actually have an old, this is a Celsius S360 or whatever it's called, C360, which is just a basic Asetek designed 360 AIO. And I am using the same bracket that has been around as long as AM4. And in fact, when it comes to brackets, it comes with the hook style. So it's gonna work with any AM4 cooler, and I'm proving that by showing you one right here that we got in like 2017 or 2018, something like that. And it kept it at 95C. Now let's talk about the 95C, because I know a lot of people right now are like, oh my God, the AMD furnace is back. I jumped on the phone and had a phone call with my AMD rep to go, hey, is this normal? Basically what I said was, in Cinebench, that was the hottest it got in terms of like the quickest. All the tests hit 95C, all of them, except for the gaming test. And I said, that's odd. Why is it hitting 95C? Because what wasn't happening was thermal throttling. It was still 5.1 gigahertz all core, even at 95C. And he said, that's by design. Now, of course, all TJ Maxes are by design. But on Intel, if you hit TJ Max, your core clocks immediately drop, because the way that it keeps it from going hotter is dropping core clocks. Because voltage and core clocks are directly tied on Intel. Now, they are on AMD as well. However, they're directly tied. So if you hit TJ Max, the way that the motherboard and the CPU control itself is it goes, crap, slow down, turn itself down. Because to turn down the voltage, you have to turn down the clock speed with it. They're tied. That doesn't happen on AMD. It went to 95C, it stayed at 95C, and it stayed at 5.1. Now, we'll be fully investigating what happens with better cooler solutions as we go into the overclocking portion of this review cycle, and that's probably one of the next videos that I do. But I'm concerned that folks are gonna look at this and just say, oh, it's just another heater, you know, because that was the 12th gen joke, right? You're gonna make jokes, go for it. Have a field day. I mean, the memes are probably already happening. But the cool thing was the fact that it didn't throttle, because it was explained to me it is absolutely by design. It could run at 95C all day, every day, 24/7, and will not degrade. That's what I was told. But the fact that it's only 11 watts higher than the pretend 1200K, because it's only 11 watts higher and giving you that much. And here's the crazy part. If you actually compare performance per watt, it's 7% more efficient than 5000 series. 7% more efficient, but up to 100% more powerful depending on the workload. I don't think we've seen this big of a jump yet. From 3 to 4 is a bigger jump than we've seen from 1 to 1.5 to 2 to 3. It's exciting. And that's why I basically wrote AMD back and I said, hey, I really need another one of these, because for the first time since I tore apart my FX 8350 rig back in I think it was 2013, I have been purely Intel systems at home ever since. 3770K is what I had after that. 4790K, Devil's Canyon after that. Then I had, from there, X platform, X99 and X299 Intel Extreme, all the way up until the 10th gen that I'm currently running now. My last CPU before the 10900K was actually a 10980X, or XE, but I ended up going back to mainstream for the first time from there. And I built that 12th gen system that I just never took home. It's still sitting out there wrapped up in a bag from finishing that video, because I know this is coming, and I wanted to see, will this CPU win me back personally? We've been using AMD rigs at the studio here for 5 years. My rig over there for work is currently a 12th gen because it was one of those things that I was daily driving going, do I want to take this home? I firmly believe the 7950X now is what's going in my home system. But I have to wait to build it for myself, because now we have to hope that the RDNA side of AMD can bring the same hurt to NVIDIA that it's doing currently to Intel, and I hope can continue to do with 13th gen improvements. I'm just really curious as to how Intel is going to respond, because rumors are now saying it can clock higher than AMD, which means it better be hitting 6 gigs and doing it without hitting 105C, because that's the TJ Maxx on Intel. Couple of things I want to mention here real quick though. If you're a new builder and you're buying Zen 4, the AMD Expo RAM, which is the specifically certified AM5 DDR5, is slowly trickling out. G-Skill has some. But when you boot the system for the first time, or you make any sort of BIOS changes, it goes through a series of memory timing trainings. Every system does that. However, this one here I want to point out, it took a solid 10 reboots or so before I ever saw a BIOS splash screen on the first boot. I was tempted to call my AMD rep, and I was tempted to hit the power button or the clear CMOS, and I went, no, Jay, it's been a while since we've had to review any new hardware, but you know how new systems go. Sometimes the boot cycles take time. What is essentially happening here on the AM5 platform is you'll see that it'll pause on a Q code 15, and that should be Q code 15 for Asus, MSI, ASRock, Gigabyte, and I don't know how many other manufacturers are currently out there, but you'll see it pause on code 15 and then probably loop. 15 again, no image, loop, 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 loop. So in my instance, it looped about 6 times before the blue light on my monitor finally came on, which said it sensed a signal. And then it booted again, no image. And I went, that's weird. And then I got an ASRock text to pop up for like 3 frames, and it went away. I was like, that's weird, and it boot looped again. And I went, the frig is this thing doing? Then it restarted, and I got the ASRock logo for a little bit longer, and it went away, and I got the little cursor in the corner, which tells me BIOS is loading, and then it rebooted again, and I went, what the actual F is happening here? Then the next boot, which was like boot 10, finally made it all the way to the BIOS. It was explained to me that what's happening specifically with AM5 is it's constantly adjusting on each one of those boots the timing. So it starts with really tight timings, and if it doesn't post, it loosens and loosens and loosens and loosens a little bit, till it can get the tightest timings at the DDR5 base, which is 4800 megahertz, that it can post with, giving you the best memory results based on the sticks and the way the voltage or the memory controller is interacting with those sticks. See, in the past with DDR5 and DDR4 and 3, you put the sticks in, boots to whatever the base numbers are, the super loose timings and the slowest, it was like 1333 megahertz or 1066 megahertz on like DDR3, and then like DDR4, it was 2133, and then with DDR5, it's 4800. It would just boot at that with loose timings and just off you go until you enable XMP on Intel, DOCP on DDR4, or now AMD Expo on DDR5. It's adjusting the timings to be as fast as possible. Then when you enable Expo, it does the same thing. So if you're a new builder, don't freak out. It seems broken. It scared me. It's not, it's doing the intelligent thing. Every subsequent boot after that will be normal speed. It's during that timing process. If your system loses power long enough for the caps to drain, it'll do it again as well. Keep that in mind. Or if you clear the CMOS or update the BIOS or make any memory changes whatsoever to the platform. So AMD's 7000 series Zen 4 architecture, as far as I'm concerned, at the risk of being labeled an AMD fanboy, which would be quite the opposite from the way I'm normally labeled, in my opinion, right now, at this day and time, is the best, most refined platform you can personally build. And I'm assuming the 7600 is gonna be just as good, and just multi-core threading, or the multi-core performance will be lower. But the snappiness, the smoothness of Windows has never felt like it does today. The best way to put it is, to me, it felt like a much faster Intel system than an Intel system. It's the best way to put it. In the past, Ryzen systems have had weird quirks. Windows would do something weird, random error, click on something, it hesitates and comes up just randomly. But the 12th gen, and I thought to myself, is this a placebo? Is this the honeymoon period? Came back to my 12th gen system, started moving around on it. Again, a clean OS. You can tell there's a difference. And it was confirmed to me by my rep that they've been hearing numerous times now from other reviewers that that's the case for them. So that made me feel less like, okay, it's just a honeymoon placebo. There is really an OS, like I'm telling you right now, insta-click. You click on something, it's instantly open on the OS. I've never seen that. And that was while I was installing updates, downloading Steam games, downloading the benchmarks. I had like 17 tabs open at one point, and you click a tab and it's just up, it's instant. You click the browser, it's instantly open. If you've been looking at building a new system, I would highly, highly recommend giving the AMD AM5 platform a look. Obviously, Intel's 13th gen is like a month away, and we're gonna just do this all over again. Welcome to review season, guys. It's been 2 years of nothing but a bunch of bull crap. The manufacturers are back, and they are bringing some good stuff. Just need RDNA 3 to really put a railroad spike through Jensen's head.